Can you get out of bounds in every LittleBigPlanet level? And I don't just mean making it to some area away from the main path. I mean, fully outside of the bounds of the level design, on the world floor. Well, it's definitely possible for introduction, where even though we're meant to stay in the front layer, we can use this rainbow that's part of the background to change layer and fall below the level, where for some reason there's this random piston. Most of first steps is kind of already on the floor, but there is a small area after the wall next to the scoreboard that we can use 2 people to get to once we're in the back layer. And since we're on the floor and outside of the level's main area, this counts as out of bounds. Get a Grip is similar where most of the level is already on the floor, but by doing a trick called a deload while we're on a structure, we can remove its collision to fall down and out of bounds. This also works right at the beginning of the level, where we even see some objects fall down. Since we can't really deload anything in the Castle of Skate to Victory, and the rest of the level is along the ground, the only place to get out of bounds is past the water next to the scoreboard, which is too far to jump to. This is where we can deload one of the windmills outside of the castle, and then reload it to have us launch over the entire level, landing us past the water, on the floor, and out of bounds. We're even going to be trying the minigames for this challenge too, and on tie skipping, the walls are kind of too high to get over at the start, and the other areas don't give us many options either. We can jump to reach the flag, but we can't get on top of it. Even if we could, the wall is still too high. Castle Climb Challenge has walls that are way too high all around it, and deloading doesn't do anything, so there's nothing we can do here. The wall at the start of Skateboard Freefall is also too high, and the end of the level runs along the ground, making this one kind of impossible as well. Sometimes you can clip through the wood, which might let us get to the ground there, but it's all filled with gas anyway. Swinging Safari lets us get out pretty much straight away, just by using a second player to jump over the wall to the left, where there's this little area on the ground. Then there isn't much in the rest of the level. We can't do the same on Burning Forest because the wall is too high, but once we make it to the area with all of the crocs, it's actually pretty easy to use one of them to get launched onto the roof of a later section, where after we see the scoreboard, we can run off and onto the floor, completely out of bounds. While it is pretty easy to get partially out of bounds on the Meerkat Kingdom just by changing layer in the right spot, I haven't found any way to get to the level's floor from here, since it's all pretty enclosed. Except at the scoreboard, where there isn't much above it at all, aside from the entrance. So if we deload the entrance, we can actually land just above the scoreboard and do a big jump to get out of bounds here. You can even see some of the logic for the dissolving blocks down here. All 3 of the Flaming Seesaws levels take place along the ground and have the same walls at the beginning and the end, which, funnily, are low enough to get a jump over using a couple of different methods. One way is to get a super high jump off of Little Zim after doing a 2-player jump, which is what I did for both the easy and medium levels. You can also do it without the extra jump though, by just sliding up the wall properly to get a boost from it, which is what I did for the hard version. Except the out of bounds area in this one is a lot smaller, but it still counts. Tunnel Plunge has a pretty significant deload partway through, which lets us get out to the floor on the left pretty easily. The only thing is that it actually connects straight to the scoreboard, so even though we're out of bounds, you can actually get here without really doing any tricks. So just for good measure, we'll see if we can get any further out of bounds. Even though it looks like it, the roof at the start of the level isn't actually closed off, since after jumping off the race gate, we can change layer onto it, and then jump off at the right spot to start falling, landing us out of bounds to the right of the scoreboard. Even though it's a survival game, Meerkat Bounce is still pretty interesting. The main area is completely surrounded by gas, and after the button gets pressed we're pretty much forced to finish the level, so it seems pretty hopeless. But since the checkpoint actually takes a moment to be pulled by its piston, if we pause the game at a moment where the checkpoint is through the gas, but not yet at the scoreboard, we can disconnect and then reconnect our player to spawn from the checkpoint during this moment, where in this case, places us just on this ledge, letting us get up and find ourselves on the other side of the gas. For some reason the gas doesn't have a back layer, so we can actually walk behind it and fall into this small area under the minigame, but unfortunately this area is closed off and there isn't any way to get out from here, so despite our efforts, this one doesn't actually count. But it is funny seeing the meerkats being activated from below. The Wedding Reception is another one of those levels that lets us get out pretty much straight away without much effort, where we can just jump from the skull and onto the candle to get out. It doesn't seem possible to do this anywhere else though. The darkness is almost completely enclosed with the roof and everything for the entirety of the level, except for the start again, where after turning up the brightness so that we can see, it's pretty easy to climb up between the ladder and the wall after jumping with 2 players to get up here. After running off, we can see that this level actually uses the blank background instead of the wedding one, which is pretty funny. And yeah, without the lights up you literally can't see anything down here. The start of Skulldozer is quite interesting because of how this checkpoint isn't actually activated at the same time that the auto-scroller is. So after it goes up, we can just hold to retry to get onto this ledge. This doesn't actually lead to much though, since the gas here is just too high to make it any further. But we do still have the end of the level, where these walls are actually kind of too high, at first anyway. If we spawn from the checkpoint at the right time again, we can land on top of the heart and quickly get a jump that lands us on the door before it rises. From here we can just jump onto the dark matter and make our way out of bounds from here, where there's this floating key thing. Doing this actually lets us walk all the way back to the left across the dark matter platform to get us out of bounds on that side after all. The dangerous descent sort of lets us climb up these wheels to potentially get through the gap at the top, but it's really hard. And even if we could do it, it doesn't actually lead us anywhere. Since the rest of the level is surrounded by gas, the only other option we have is to spawn from the checkpoint at a specific time like we did in Meerkat Bounce, but the checkpoint just moves way too fast in this one for us to avoid the scoreboard, making it just barely not possible. The start of Wobble Poles has a pretty low roof, so after we get 2 people onto this wall using the race gate, we can do a jump with the 2 of them to get up and walk off the edge to get out of bounds. On the other side of the level, the wall is pretty high, but if there was some way to reach the skull, it would actually be possible to get out again. But the only way I see that happening is with this bouncy platform, which isn't enough. Bubble Labyrinth has no roof, but incredibly high walls all around, and no way to slip out during the main section. Even after getting a super high jump with 2 people and Little Zim, we can still see that the wall is just too high for us, making this one not possible. The first half of Boomtown takes place along the floor, so we can't get out here. But at the Scorpions, we can use them to swing to the Collector, where he helps us get a jump to land on the roof of the second half. After we get near the scoreboard, it's barely possible to clear this gap with a jump, letting us run off and get out of bounds. You can also reach this point by using the rocket car earlier in the level in a specific way. I also tried jumping with 2 people from below, but it's just too high. Aside from the beginning, the entirety of the mines is a 3-layer prison, with absolutely no way to get out and no way to skip the level. Even after we do a couple of team jumps to backtrack at the beginning, the floor lines up with the level's edge, making it impossible to get out here as well. We can get a pretty big jump to try and get on top of the mines, but this part afterwards is just too steep to get up completely. If you could do it though, it would lead to the level's floor after running across the roof for a while, where there's this sign with an arrow on it for some reason. Even though Serpentshrine seems pretty open, it does a pretty good job of keeping you in bounds, with gas blocking you from leaving most of the time. There is a little thing you can do in the 2x area to get out here, but jumping off just lands us back in bounds anyway. Even escaping the boss fight doesn't lead anywhere useful. It was only until a player named Hyperfied accidentally clipped through a wall after getting pushed by a serpent, where it was discovered you could fall behind this part of the level, onto the floor and out of bounds. Thank you, Hyperfied. Most of Wrestler's Drag is pretty enclosed except for the beginning, where thankfully the mountain is angled properly to reach this pillar, where another multiplayer jump can be used to get one of the players up, letting them fall out of bounds, where after walking for a while, you can see the end of the main path. Cowabunga is completely surrounded by gas, and since the checkpoint sits just below it as well, we can't really do any tricks to spawn early from it. There is, however, the button, which moves when it gets pushed. So after we get a player onto the block and press it, we can launch them all the way up to where the logic is. From here we have a better chance of escaping the gas, where on the left it reaches the level's boundary, and on the right we can actually see where it ends. Unfortunately though, even with the help of another player, it's just barely too much for us to get over. All 3 roller run levels are completely encased in 3 layers of wood and fire, and with the walls at the ends being too tall to jump over, there just isn't any way to get out of bounds in these levels at all, even with deloading. Puzzle Wheel is pretty short, but again it has super high walls on both sides of it. We can make it onto this roof pretty easily, but it doesn't lead us anywhere else. And with the main part also not giving us anything, this one is just not possible to get out of bounds in. In Lowrider, there isn't really any way we can get out of bounds until the second half. There is this area behind the wheel that you can get to, but it's not really useful. Instead, we can get a lever fling onto the roof here, and since there's pretty much nothing in the back layer, we can hold onto this dissolve that controls the lift to block the layer change, letting us fall out of bounds. You can also reach this area by having Mags turn upside down, and then grabbing her to change layers. Subway has pretty tall walls at the beginning and end of it, and the level itself is pretty claustrophobic. After the last elevator we can get onto this roof, but falling off just takes us back downwards. I've tried jumping over both of the walls at the start and finish, but even after jumping off a box with another player, it's still too high. The beginning of the construction site has this tiny gap above its gas, which we might be able to get over, but it's not something I've been able to do. But if we go to the sticker switch section, it's pretty easy to get onto the roof and make our way out of bounds from there, after doing a couple more jumps. There is also a section later where we can get pretty high up and over this wall, but the gas just goes too far. The drag race is probably one of the only levels where the entire thing already runs along the floor from each end of the world, meaning there's like actually nowhere we can get out of bounds to. Does this count as a fail? I'm not really sure. For most of Elevation, we're just trapped inside these elevators, wouldn't you know it? But just before the first one, it's pretty easy to use 2 players to get onto the roof and run across the top of all 3 of them. After this, we really just jump off the edge where we land out of bounds from the main part of the level. But it doesn't stop here. If we keep walking, we actually find a lot of extra stuff, such as a long stone ramp, a wooden ramp, some pillars, another finish line, heaps of cardboard boxes, and even an extra scoreboard. This is obviously an early, unfinished version of the drag race level, since all of the ramps, boxes, race gate, and scoreboard all match. As for why it's here, I have no idea. Maybe the 2 levels were originally going to be 1. Regardless, it's a super cool find. The discombobulator sets us up pretty well, since it gives us a lever and various objects in the background to work with, where we can get a lever fling to grab one of the lamps. From here we can swing onto this block, jump off of it, and land back a layer, where we can move forward and change layer again to get out of bounds, where sadly there's nothing else down here. The entire floor in Endurance Dojo is covered with gas, except for the end where we can't go anywhere else anyway, in a tiny section that's beneath the entrance, which would count if we can get to it. Because the gas goes so far below this platform though, the only way we can get over there is by using another player to drag us through the floor, sort of like how we did in Waste Disposal that one time, but the platform just seems too thick to do anything with, making this one not possible. Sensei's Lost Castle is also pretty limited, with only having a couple of out of bounds areas that would even count for us. And of course, there just isn't any way for us to access them because of how much this level uses all 3 layers. The most interesting thing we can do is get on top of the cat, and then have another player release it, letting us fly all the way to the roof. Which I mean, is sort of out of bounds, we're just on the roof instead of the floor. But yeah, jumping from up here doesn't really help either. But it looks cool. The Terrible Oni's volcano is pretty similar again, where there are some areas we would like to get to, but there just isn't any way to do it. The stairs at the start aren't even glued in any way, so if you had something heavy enough you could probably get down there. But yeah, we're just super limited throughout the entire level. Even the end is entirely enclosed. You can get pretty high up in Daruma-san, which lets you run above the stage for a while, but since the wall at the end is so tall it doesn't even matter. The wall at the start though can be jumped over using 2 people since the tower is so much closer to the doll. And even though the area is pretty small, it still counts. The Wheel of Misfortune is totally enclosed until getting to the scoreboard, where, like a lot of other levels, if we could just jump over this gas, we would be free. But yeah, it just goes out too far to clear, even with 2 people. We can't even see the end. Roller Castle is pretty good though, because even though there's nowhere to go in the main part, it's pretty easy to get a jump onto the pillar next to the entrance, to then climb the rest of the way over it. We don't even need 2 people for it, and again there's absolutely nothing over here. At first, Dancer's Court is pretty hard to get out of, mostly because of all the fire, but partway through there's a pretty well-known trick that lets us reach the scoreboard early. Thankfully it also lets us fall behind the level if we do it properly, letting us get out of bounds pretty easily. Elephant Temple also has a relatively well-known out of bounds area that isn't too hard to get to, but it doesn't really lead anywhere useful for us. Unless it was 2020 and we wanted to do a 100% run. So all of this is a dead end. We can fall behind part of the level here, but it just lands us in the 2-player section, and the wall at the end might be possible to jump over if you got a perfect falling over jump, but it's a lot easier for us to just do this at the beginning, and combine it with a super jump to get out that way. There isn't a lot we can do at the start of the Great Magician's Palace, but there's actually a lot of easy ways to get out of bounds at the end of the level, largely because there's no back layer. One way is just to change layer when standing in the right spot so you can fall out. You can also get on top of the roof here using the Magician and do pretty much the same thing. Once you're out here, you can walk to both ends of the level too. All of Shifting Temple is made up of 3 layers, and the wall at the end is just too big. But by doing another bedtime jump off of Little Zim's car, we can make it up here, do another companion jump, and get out of bounds. You can also get down here if you just deload the entrance, which actually lets you run further to the right. Even the race gate falls down. Pillar jumping is like Meerkat Bounce, where we can't really get anywhere because of the walls, and getting placed directly above the scoreboard. So if we again just spawn from the checkpoint at the right moment by disconnecting our player, we can instead land on top of this wall, to then walk out of bounds. Over here there's a wooden block for some reason, and we can also talk to Big Zam again. We spend most of Fire Pits in the front layer, but it doesn't seem like there's any way for us to fall back and out of bounds. And with the start being enclosed, and the wall after the scoreboard being too tall, the only place we might be able to get out is here, where getting a high jump by using 2 players gets us partway there, but getting over fully doesn't seem possible. There isn't much we can do in the Frozen Tundra until this checkpoint, where deloading gets us out of the main path. After we explore a bit, we can use 2 people to get onto this ledge, where from here we can walk onto the world floor. You can also reach this point by doing super good bunny hops. You can also get out later on without deloading, but the area it puts you in isn't useful apart from seeing this logic. The bunker is kind of similar, where deloading this checkpoint near the beginning lets us get out quite easily, since the rest is pretty closed off. A much more amusing method of getting out though is by using the cannon that's further in the level, where if you just press the button properly, you can get launched out with a ton of speed. Then after running to the right for a while, you can find one of the conveyor belts for later too. By doing a lever fling near the end of the level, there's even more ways to get out, one of which lets us get to the other side of the scoreboard. I'm not really sure why this ticker is here though. Because the roof is super open at the start of the collector's layer, it's really easy to use one of the sponges to get up. Now just by jumping off the edge we can fall all the way down where there's another random piston like introduction. Are these levels related somehow? Probably not. And we can't actually get much further after this. The main part of the level doesn't give us much else to work with. There is a small hidden area though, and at the Magician we can sort of get out, but it doesn't really lead anywhere useful. But at the very end you can use two people to get on top of the carriage, which then lets you bypass both the scoreboard and the wall after it. Then once we're down here we can actually see a lot of logic for the characters appearing after you save them. It's also possible to get onto the carriage with only one player by doing a lever fling near the genie, then falling off. Also, once you're on top of the carriage, it's possible to get stuck inside. The collector actually starts us off in a super open area, but without any way to get out early, it's kind of useless, and we can't even backtrack once it does let us out. And yeah, it is possible to make it through this door before the collector closes it, but there's literally nothing in here. It's also possible to escape the boss fight before it ends, but again, this doesn't really benefit us in any way. Once we are at the end though, we can deload this checkpoint which removes the middle layer for us. From here we can fall in, and just drop down to get out of bounds completely. But it's not over yet, there's still 3 more minigames to check out. Spline Rider is completely surrounded by snow and gas, which we can experience directly after deloading the entrance. There's actually a second race gate down here too for some reason by the way. I had an idea where we might be able to slide up the ramp far enough to get out, but there's actually a wall at the end of it. This is probably the only time that it's useful, but since the scoreboard technically has a checkpoint, we can actually deload it, which detaches itself from its base, letting it fall down. From here we can just spawn from it, and we'll be below the level, where on the left side there's just a block of glass sitting down here. Even though the wall at the start of Rototubes is too high, it's pretty easy to make it onto the snow, to then walk back and find that the wall is actually attached to the bounds of the level. Then since the snow doesn't extend past the scoreboard, there isn't any way to get out on the other side. There is a sticker here though that I've never seen before. Jetpack Tunnel has walls that are too high all around, and the minigame itself is entirely surrounded by rubber, metal, and gas, so even if you could slip out in between the obstacles, it wouldn't lead anywhere. There's a couple of different ways to make it onto this wall, such as spawning from the checkpoint at the right time, but it doesn't let us get over any of the important ones since they're too far away. So as for our results, there were only 5 story levels that we couldn't get out on, which were the mines, subway, and all 3 of the islands levels. The minigames were a bit worse since there were 16 levels that we couldn't get out of bounds on. In total, making for 34 levels where it is possible to escape the main path, getting onto the world floor. It's amazing what's possible with Sackboy's unrestricted moveset and abilities. Thanks for watching.